Hello, everyone. My name is Cecil. Welcome to part two of I Felt Heard. A little bit about me. I'm on a mission to build, spread, and celebrate empathy in the workplace, internally with our employees, externally with our customers, partners, and prospects. Ultimately, in every professional interaction. And it begins with transformational listening over transactional listening. When we choose to truly listen, not to respond, not to correct, not to close, we set the table for something very powerful. An environment where people do not just feel managed, they feel heard. I do want to be super clear that this is not about a series of tactics and one liners. There is no magic potion. This is about being entirely and wholly present and very intentional about your thoughts and your words showing up with humility and optimism, creating a space for open dialogue. Throughout my professional career, and certainly in my personal life, I realized something very humbling. It is never about me. I have the power to create or destroy trust in a moment. I have the power to let people in or shut them out. I've learned a great deal through business success. However, I've learned far more through failure, through personal loss, through tragedy. And even now, as I navigate a devastating disease, the lesson remains the same. It is still not about me. As I show up to support my wife, Grace, our baby girl, Lizzie, and myself, I am reminded that I still have the power and the responsibility to create spaces where people feel heard, where you feel heard, spaces where empathy is not theoretical, where vulnerability is safe, where love and humanity can be shared between us. Part one focused on presence and creating the conditions for someone to feel heard. Part two focuses on what happens after that, the fragile middle, where trust either grows or quietly breaks. Part three will focus on listening skills that sustain trust under pressure. This session, part two, exists because most breakdowns do not happen at the beginning. They happen right here in the middle. When someone feels safe, you'll notice very specific changes. They stop hedging their answers. They volunteer context you didn't ask for. They admit uncertainty. Safety opens people up. Trust moves things forward. This happens because safety removes self protection. Once people no longer feel the need to manage impressions, honesty shows up. That honesty is what allows trust to form, but it does not guarantee it. What we do next determines whether openness turns into confidence or will it turn into second guessing. Disagreement itself does not break trust. Instead, how it's expressed does. Trust breaks when disagreement sounds like this: correction instead of curiosity, reframing before understanding, responses that start with actually. Conversely, trust is preserved when disagreement sounds like this: help me understand how you got there. Can I pressure test that with you? I see that a little differently. Can we compare notes? Can we look at this from another angle? The difference is not agreement. That's a very important distinction. It's respect for how someone arrived at their view. Interestingly, most correction is not about ego, it's about protection. We correct for a lot of very positive attributes that we carry. We correct because we want to be helpful, we want to be efficient, we want to sound competent. Silence makes us uncomfortable. Correction is often an instinct to regain control, something that we learn from the time we are children. The problem, however, is that correction before understanding makes people feel managed, manipulated, not heard. Now is not the time for correction. Now is the time for understanding. Unfortunately, these instincts to correct, they're rewarded everywhere around us. Speed signals competence. Certainty signals authority. Fixing signals value. However, in trust building moments, all of these instincts backfire. Speed shortens understanding. Certainty closes dialogue. Fixing skips emotional accuracy. Building trust often requires fighting the very behaviors we've been trained to rely upon. And that is not easy. I get it. It requires us to slow down, be very intentional, get very present in the moment. So how does optimism play into this? Optimism fails when it skips over reality. This is a version of toxic positivity. I call it optimism with spin. It's very manipulative. It is incredibly disingenuous, and you will lose credibility almost immediately. You'll feel resistance when optimism sounds like, this will be easy. Ah, that shouldn't be an issue. This feels like reassurance, but candidly, it has the exact opposite effect. Instead, you'll feel trust when optimism looks like this instead. This part is usually harder than expected. This part is usually harder than expected. Here's how teams that I've worked with in the past work through it. Optimism builds. Optimism builds trust only when it acknowledges difficulty. It stays present with it. We are not trying to rush past it. Optimism in this form feels very collaborative. It draws people in, not because it is easy, but instead because it is very meaningful. So, what is optimism in practice? Optimism shows up as steadiness, not reassurance. Examples people recognize immediately. Hey, this is a big decision. It should feel heavy. Or, I could see why this is complicated. Let's walk through this together. How about this? This won't be quick, but it is workable. Let me be super clear about this. Optimism is not about promising outcomes. It's staying engaged with uncertainty. This means that you need to be very comfortable with a room being uncomfortable. The other superpower that coincides with optimism is humility. Humility is not uncertainty. It is confidence without defensiveness. You will notice humility when someone doesn't rush to fill the silence. You'll notice it when they're willing to say, I don't know yet. You'll notice it when they invite collaboration instead of control. Humility often shows up as vulnerability. It often draws people in because an environment of safety has been created. Humility reduces the other person's need to protect themselves, which accelerates trust. So think about this. Think about where you feel pressure to sound confident. Do you feel pressure when you're with senior leaders to sound confident? How about when you're with a customer or with someone you haven't met yet, a prospect? How about anyone that you care about impressing? Here's the thing. Those moments are exactly where humility matters most. It is by far the hardest to practice. In fact, the other person won't even realize it until way later what the effect of you practicing humility felt like for them. And that's really important. So combine all of that, you'll know when trust forms. It forms at a very specific moment. You'll see it when the buyer stops selling you or the buyer stops selling you and they start to think out loud. What's in their head is now in the room. They ask, what would you do if this were you? They admit internal concerns or fears about the project, their ability to complete the project, things that are keeping them from attaining their goals. This happens because naming risk signals protection, not persuasion. So when you say, this is where teams often underestimate effort, do you know what the buyer hears? They hear that, wow, you're helping me avoid mistakes. That's when trust locks in. Remember, you are the person looking around the corner for the things that your buyer is not anticipating. That is when trust locks in. So here's what it sounds like before trust. Answers are short. Questions feel very transactional. They withhold context. After trust, what does that look like? People slow the conversation. They add internal context. They give you information that they otherwise would not have given up. They explore they explore options openly. They're thinking out loud. This shift tells you that trust is present. Here's the thing. This is when you will start getting excited. Rushing here and jumping on what they say is the easiest thing to do. However, rushing here is what often breaks trust. Your job is to stay present, to be very intentional and very thoughtful. Remember, it's not your voice that matters, it's theirs. Once again, it is not your voice that matters, it is theirs. It's time to breathe and be quiet. Let them talk. You need to give them the space to express themselves. Let them invite them. Let them invite you into their world. Now, here's the thing. Trust usually breaks for very predictable reasons. Interrupting too early, reframing before acknowledging an emotion, introducing urgency that serves us, not them. The fix is rarely explanation. Instead, it's acknowledgement. So when trust does break, it's time to stop and acknowledge, hey, I feel like I missed something. Did I? I may have moved too quickly here. Shall we take a quick break? Hey, I noticed something. What didn't land just now? Your perspective really matters more here. Can we pause? I'd love to learn more. Those types of questions restore trust more often than persuasion. Your job isn't to convince and persuade. Your job is to stop and listen. So if you feel like you're persuading, stop, acknowledge, rewind. Now here it is. This is a competitive advantage because most systems discourage it. Feeling heard sounds like a soft skill. The reality is that the people we are talking to, the people that we're talking to daily, especially in business, are being hounded by so many other people. Here's your time to sound different and differentiate yourself from everyone else. Here's what your competitors are pressured by. They're pressured by speed to get the deal done, quotas to hit revenue targets, scripts that sound fake or insincere, time boxed conversations that do not allow people to breathe. The funny thing is, we are also pressured by those exact same things. Feeling heard requires presence, which cannot be automated. It cannot be rushed. That's why developing these skills and creating rooms where people feel heard compounds over time and differentiates without trying. Deals will get done faster. Quotas are exceeded. Conversations become real and people breathe. When trust exists, internal alignment happens faster. Defensive questions decrease. Next steps feel mutual. Well, when momentum feels forced, trust hasn't landed yet. That's a listening problem, not a closing problem. And if that happens, it's time to stop. It's time to press rewind, slow down, take a breath, and start again. It takes time to build trust. But once it's there, everything else that follows is fast. And quite frankly, it's a whole lot of fun. So here we are at the end. Part one created safety. Today's session, part two, builds trust. It helps us recognize and protect trust. Trust tells us what matters. Listening teaches us how to respond. Once safety is created, trust is built, you have set up a room where people can feel heard. They will start opening up. Part three sustains it through listening, especially when the stakes are high, personally or professionally. Throughout all of this, remember both optimism and humility. Vulnerability. Optimism keeps people moving. Humility and vulnerability keeps them safe. That's how people don't just feel heard, they feel confident moving forward. And a true partnership and relationship can form. Stay tuned for part three on what that looks like. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. See you next time.